And at a young age, I had a parent ultimately commit suicide. From then, it impacted me, impacted my siblings, and kind of really everyone else in my family. What brought me peace to it was the fact that the action that she did was ultimately the decision that she made herself. I feel that everyone at some point is going to have a major humbling experience in their lifetime. The counselor who I talked to, I said, "You were right. You said no matter how much you bottle it up, it will always come back to you. Suicide is never the answer. Will never be an answer. It doesn't end the pain, it just gives it to someone else."
Welcome back to Guiding Tides.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Guiding Tides, our podcast where we try to address different concerns around the mental health field, mental health issues, and how that impacts all of us in our community and individually. I'm very happy to introduce you to our guest today, Josh Smith, young man who's getting ready to move on from high school and on to bigger and better things. And we're going to talk about his journey growing up and the different episodes in his life where he's had to struggle through, grow from, and decide how he's going to handle his future that's rushing at him. So without further ado, Joshua, welcome to the show. We're
Thanks
really
for
happy
having
to
me.
have you here. Yeah, absolutely, man. So if you could kind of introduce yourself to our viewers and who are you, and give me a little background as to why you're here. Yeah, what are you doing here, kid?
Yeah, so just like my said, my name is Josh, about to be a high school graduate. Here to talk about my journey. A lot of mental health related journeys in particular.
I was not talking about my mental health at 17, but everyone else was. That's for sure.
I think that's fair across the board, Jeff. So when you say mental health journey, is there a particular event or anything you kind of want to kick off conversation with?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of just, going right in. At a young age, I had a parent ultimately commit suicide. From then, it impacted me, impacted my siblings, and kind of really everyone else in my family, intermediate or not, in their own way. Um, I feel like for me personally, it really gave me a lot of concern and worry, especially for how growing up would then look like, because it did happen in, my early teen years. Um, so kind of how everyone was going to recover from that. My siblings, they're not much older and younger than me, other than, a little brother, but he was the youngest one to experience all of this. And even today I still kind of, wonder, how is he going to recover from it? How is he going to, piece that all together, especially as he continues to grow up?
So it sounds like when that traumatic event, and I'm very sorry that happened to you,
Yeah, absolutely.
I I'm hearing that you took a lot of responsibility on for yourself. Am I correct in saying that?
You are correct. A lot a lot of where my mind went was, well, my siblings. How am I going to help my siblings? In the very moments after the incident, very traumatic, my focus was, okay, my siblings, how can I prevent them, or better yet, how can I help them protect their own peace of minds from the incident unfolding? How can I jump into action and better assist them? I kind of, threw myself off to the side and thought that, this is going to be something not too hard to go through. It happens a lot. Unfortunately, it happens a lot in the everyday world.
Hang on a second, because I'm trying to grasp this. Approximately how old were you when 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 your mom committed suicide?
So I just turned 15 when this had happened.
Wow. So I work with teenagers all day, and your run-of-the-mill 15-year-old is not where you're presenting your thought process was at, because you're presenting in a very clear, decisive manner. And so were you at a point where, like, you're sitting in your room and you're absorbing what happened and you're like, I got to do something for my siblings? Or was it was there a period of adjusting to the fact that this is happening to my family, this is happening to me?
Yeah, to you as well.
Right.
Now, exactly, right? Like there's a process of absorbing trauma, a traumatic event, and figuring out how you're going to handle it. But the process of dealing with trauma, it's called trauma for a reason. Like it's an impact of like knocking you off your feet, you know, and there is a point of like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what just happened. Was there a period in that time that you felt like that, or am I just assuming too much?
No, absolutely. So this was in pretty much the very beginning, if not the moments right after. I won't go too deep into detail, but when it happened, everyone was outside of the house, and so while she was in the house, my siblings were outside. Okay, well, let's take my siblings to the backyard or something, further away from the house where everything had just happened. Kind of embrace them, see what they need. How can I support them? And I knew right off the bat that this would affect everybody. Like I said, although it's common, it still has its effects.
Were you in that role prior to your mom committing suicide? Were you in the caregiver role? Because it sounds like, I mean, that's a caregiver role, you know, and you're still a sibling. But to kick into that mode of like, I got to worry about these people in my family. In my head, I'm envisioning you being in that role already. Because if you're just, you know, another brother or sister with your group of siblings and, everyone's an equal, you know, you're a child in the family. Um, yeah, we all have certain responsibilities. You're gonna walk the dog because you're the oldest, or I don't know, stuff like that. You know, you take certain roles, but to be in that role of like worrying about immediately, I gotta take care of my younger brothers and sisters. You know, um, I'm just wondering, were you already in that role prior to your mom committing suicide?
So yeah, it definitely wasn't just something that snapped right there and then. Months into years before, there was actually a divorce process between my two parents, and a lot of the energy and focus was on that divorce process. And it led into the point where I was like, I want to make sure that although this is still something that's important going on in everyone's life, my siblings, they're still going through school. They're still growing up. Their minds are still developing. And don't get me wrong, I'm also still developing. I'm also still, going through school and such. But I feel like a lot of that, taking action role originally started from that divorce process.
I think about how selfish and self-centered I was in high school, and hearing you talk about thinking of other people, thinking of your siblings, the word impressive comes to mind. I don't know, it's mind-blowing to me. Um, I just, I would be feeling like betrayed, like I would, the selfishness that I feel like inherits me is like I would feel like she did it to me or something, and like now I'm broken and I need help and I'm never gonna be okay because of this event. But you're over here just thinking like, how can I stop my siblings from feeling pain right now? Like that's something that's special. That makes you not an average, regular, normal person in society.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
No, they're very lucky to have you as
It's
a brother.
super unique, like Jeff said, expanding on that, that in the face of something so evil, so dark, you were able to compartmentalize. That's kind of how I'll put it. And you were able to say, okay, I'm feeling this, and almost like I'm going to deal with this later. But right now, I see people that may or may not look up to me physically, mentally, whatever. I need a guide. And I commend you for that. That's amazing. My question is, because we're talking about, you're about to graduate. How did you still get through school, and I assume you worked and things like that, while still focusing on your younger siblings and dealing with this unfortunate event?
So before I answer that, I do want to get back to Jeff's point about, kind of what he was feeling through high school. I feel that everyone at some point is going to have a major humbling experience in their lifetime, whether it be through mental health or through something major, everyone's going to have that realization at some point of their life. Could be 16, could be 60.
I happen to collect them. I have like a collection of them.
And yeah, and that's
Unfortunately.
that's also very much something that could happen. Minor things can very much build up over time until the point where it spills over. Now, going into your question, yeah, so still going through school was more challenging, especially after, especially when all your siblings go to different schools at the same time. That was very much something that was, on the table of, okay, well, will that have to change? A lot of that comes from advocacy. And in my younger childhood years, that was something I struggled with. But I had eventually, you know, been through meetings with different counselors and such and learned that advocacy part.
As in like how to advocate for yourself better.
Right. I didn't want to switch schools. Growing up, I always switched elementary schools, and that's just not something I wanted to do with high school. And I'm also in a, technical school, so I'm learning hands-on trade skills. Who would want to, switch out of that? So I really wanted to kind of stay where I was. I wanted to finish it out there, and plus I only had like 2 more years of public school anyway, right? So could we work something out? I wish I could say that all my siblings, could experience that as well. But unfortunately, due to other situations, they had to move their school. Just based off of where they were living and such.
I'm still wrapping my head around the fact that you stood up, you stood up to the plate, you know, and took on that role. You said you went through therapy and you learned how to be an advocate for yourself, and that's great, But prior to going into therapy, when you were at a point of hearing that you needed to address these issues, or you yourself saying, "I got to do something about this," talk to me about that. Talk to me about how you had to look at yourself and figure out what you needed to do for yourself. Here you are in the caregiver role, and that's commendable and that's great, you know, and but I also see people who kick into that role very quickly being the savior for everybody, but then putting themselves and their needs off to the side because a lot of times it's too painful to address. I can deal with Jeff's pain and I can deal with helping him and make sure he's okay, but I'm not going to deal with my issues because they scare the crap out of me. So at what point did you start looking at, I need to look at me?
So early on, it wasn't so much me realizing the issues, but it was other people pointing it out. My parents were kind of pointing it out. Um, you know, Resource people from school, they were kind of pointing it out, and noticing it. So it was just kind of, you know, school resources that I utilize, counselors, speech therapists, and whatnot, and how to overcome those issues. But
No drugs and alcohol? That's weird. Just kidding.
um, but leading up into high school, you have to then you have to take control of yourself. You have to understand what you want for you, right? You're not gonna have people chase you down and tell you what you're doing wrong in high school. No, you got to kind of figure that out yourself.
You do. We all need to do a lot of things. I should go to the gym. I don't. I should, lots of things I should do, but I don't, and I'll make excuses not to. But with dealing with trauma, what I often find when I'm working with people is that the ex- it's not the excuses that they're making up to avoid dealing with the issues offhand. It's still dealing with the rage and feeling um, abandonment, feeling that they were robbed of the life they should have, um, and being angry at the person in this example, in this situation, the person that committed suicide. Did you go through that journey?
So Jeff mentioned earlier about it feeling like a like sabotage almost, or selfishness. It definitely did feel that way. It definitely felt, when she did that was like a stab in the back almost, you know what I mean? When it came to having to deal with that trauma and making excuses to kind of not deal with that trauma, right? I was kind of like, oh, well, I don't really feel anything, so I'm fine. You know what I mean? And I'm pretty sure that you've seen people, with your experience who've been through the same thing where they're like, oh, well, I don't really feel anything, so I'll just continue that way. And I had a school counselor who said that can eventually turn into unhealthy emotions and unhealthy actions. And I completely ignored what she said. And I was just continuing to live life, not processing anything. And it really started to show. And it took quite some time to actually show. I remember, whenever I would get into arguments with people and they'd go deep, well, then I'd be afraid that they would then go take their life.
So were you kicking into the pleaser role? You know what I mean? Like, um, not confronting a situation, but always wanting to do the right thing. Always want to be the helpful guy.
Yes. Yeah. I can definitely say that was, yeah.
Where did that come from, though? I'm reading that and I might be wrong here, but did you assess any blame on yourself?
After the passing,
Yes.
big time.
Because that's where, look, I lost my mother young too, and it wasn't in that manner, but I blamed myself. So hearing that people pleaser, I know at my root it comes from that, and that's what's prompting me to ask you that. So kind of speak on that a little bit and where you currently stand with being a people pleaser and thinking it was your fault.
So, recalling from my mother's passing, a week or two beforehand, her, my sister, and we had all gotten into a really nasty argument. And it was to the point where I've never had an argument like this, especially with a parent. You know what I mean? When you're young, you're grounded, you're punished, stupid stuff. But this was, like, this had to deal with the issue between the parents, because the issue of the argument was me talking to my father while the divorce process was going on. And it was to the point where they were really separating their own ways. And um it had just turned into a really nasty argument. And it was dragging into days. I don't like to keep an argument going for days. Really don't. There's other things to be focused on, and life is short, and it's not promised.
So where do you currently sit with the idea where you assess blame? And if you don't, what shifted in your mind? What kind of brought you peace to that emotion?
What brought me peace to it was the fact that the action that she did was ultimately the decision that she made herself. I couldn't do I couldn't influence, her to actually take what she did physically. And I wasn't there to when she did it. But I feel like it kind of was, you know what I told myself was her actions was something I couldn't control. I couldn't control her doing that, and the decision that she made was up to her. Not saying that she was in the best peace of mind when she made that action. I personally believe that anyone who commits suicide isn't in their best mind at all.
I just wanted to make sure where you sat today that you weren't blaming yourself. Because look, you immediately jumped into action. You kind of put your emotions on the back burner. You jumped into helping other people.
Wounded healer,
Wounded healer.
but healer nonetheless.
Absolutely. Completely agree with that. But you're very much so still in this journey. You're going to be in this journey for the rest of your life, right? At different phases, it's going to come back up. And I just wanted to check in there just to see where you were at with that. Because no, it's not your fault, and that's probably the best way to put it. That it wasn't anything that you did. People who are in that circumstance, which is very unfortunate, and it's very important to recognize those things, but that's off topic. It's ultimately their action, even if they aren't in a good headspace.
I feel like taking steps to kind of recover and really process all of that. I mean, this is kind of one of the biggest steps that I've taken so far, is kind of openly speaking about it and wanting to reach others about it. Um, Kind of going back a little bit, when it was, um, not processed at all, and I didn't want to take any action. It was, like I said, I was afraid that, getting into arguments, people would then, commit self-harm, suicide, things like that. So I would avoid all kind of conflict. You know what I mean? And kind of when anyone would say something, I just kind of shrug it off. Leading into these past couple months, honestly, right? Kind of really trying to unprocess that, and which is still recent. Um, I realized that the counselor who I talked to, she was right. And I even went into her office. I said, you were right. You said no matter how much you bottle it up, it will always come back to you. And she kind of had that, realization.
It's important. It's an important conversation. I'm happy that she did that. I'm grateful that you had that realization. You went back. I'm sure she felt pretty good about that.
Do you find yourself at times slipping back um, into the feeling of, blaming yourself or the anger that you felt years ago? Because I don't think it's such a linear process of like just graduating from stage to stage. That'd be great, if the pain lessened over the years. And overall, I'm sure we learn to adapt with what happened, with whatever our trauma is, right? In your case, your mom committing suicide, you know. But I'm curious if you find yourself at times coming across a photograph, thinking about a, a birthday party from years ago, or someone saying a phrase or hearing a song, something that triggers you and brings you back to a moment. And if that does happen, how do you deal with it?
100%. So it's definitely not a straight line up. It's always going to be ups and downs. It's never going to be a straightforward process. And, hearing certain songs or looking at photographs from the past, yeah, that definitely brings on a lot of emotion and grief as well. Um, when this first happened, I had a counselor actually show me something, and it really changed my thought process of how grief comes and goes. And I'll try to explain it the best that I can, but it's a room, and in this room there's a button on the wall, right? And imagine that there's this ball, and this ball is always moving in this room. Now, at first, when that passing happened, that ball is inflated. It's pressing that button constantly. You know what I mean? But over time, as you process the emotions, as you're going through the emotions, that ball will start to gradually deflate into the point where it's bouncing, and it will hit that button, but not as frequently. And it will continue to size down and size down, but it will never disappear completely. And it's always going to hit that button at some point, whether it be photographs, you view a song that you view, right? That's kind of that ball then hitting that button. You guys kind of follow along with
Yeah,
the analogy.
no, hugely.
When she gave me
You're
that,
helping me with some of my own grief right now.
I will say I've given that analogy to some people, and they're like, wow, it's kind of like a realization for them. But when she showed me that really changed my perspective of grief, of processing emotions.
Did you ever find yourself in such despair that no matter what you heard coming from your counselors, you're acknowledging, yes, I agree with you. I need to look at this. Yes, I need to develop these coping skills. Yes, that makes sense. However, I just don't have it in me today. And those days, for the viewers that are watching this, because they're there right now, right? So those days when you're like in such darkness, right? What helped you, if anything, what helped you get through that day?
I'd say, when you're kind of just sitting there you'll realize that you're the only one that can really jump into action for yourself to bring yourself up. You, of course, you can utilize counselors and therapists, um, but ultimately you have to play your part when it comes to this. You have to play your part. You have to, and I feel like the most important part is actually accepting. For a lot of people, I think it's accepting that, this happened and it sucks that it happened. But how am I going to recover? Because no one's going to come, take your mind out and redo it for you unless you can accept the fact that you need the help.
No one's coming to save you.
Right.
My mother was always the one that came to save me, and it's been a decade without her. And I really like your inflatable ball analogy, but yeah, it's one of those things, like, it never goes away. You just learn how to live with it, live with the presence of it. But yeah, my mom was probably the most impactful, influential person, besides giving birth to me and, keeping me alive in my baby years, my teenage years. Um, I jokingly say drugs and alcohol are the only reason I didn't kill myself when I was a teenager. It's really my mom. She's the only reason, just her ability to be there. And unfortunately, that leads to complications in, being an adult suffering from addiction and poor mental health. My mentality was someone is going to come to save me, and when my mom passed away, that was gone, disappeared. Even before she passed away, she had brain surgery, and it really changed who she was as a person for the rest of her life. Just that event alone frightfully caused me to change my ways, or, take a look at it. I can't imagine having things be different. The strength that you're displaying, it's like unfathomable to me from, even when I was 25 to 30 years old, right leading up to the time I lost my mom when I was around 30. Yeah, that forced me to grow up and forced me to have to figure it out, because she wasn't going to show up and figure it out for me anymore. What was your mom like, man, before she got, sick? And what was your relationship with her like?
Yeah, honestly, what you said kind of struck a nerve. Because that hit deep, because that was the same thing for me. She was my hero. She was my role model that I looked up to in life. And when I lost her, that was just crumbling. You don't really expect to lose your mom in your early teen years. Obviously you hear, one day I won't be around, but you never think that day actually comes until it does. And I remember when me and my dad, kind of after we had a bit of a rocky relationship, when we get into those arguments, my mom would know how to combat it best. And it put me into a really bad spot because I didn't really know what to do. You know what I mean? I wouldn't really argue with my dad as much, but it kind of, came, especially after, no one was in the right mind. So I know that arguments that he had early on, he didn't mean words I said I didn't really mean, but it was just still crumbling, because then you get those flashbacks like, okay, well, this would typically happen, but it's never going to happen.
As a parent, and I'm going to go somewhere with this, as a parent, you want your children to be better than yourself. And I think anybody watching can back me on that. So I'm going to speak to you from a parent's perspective. So you said when your dad would act up and somebody needed to give him a spanking or whatever, right? That was mom. Maybe it wasn't always the right way, but it's what was effective, right? Um, I think you got a lot. I know you got a lot of positive traits from your mom. And I think you actually know how to combat things better than you realize from the positive traits that you retained from her. This is a extremely tough episode, guys. You are so well spoken. The way you are handling this, Jeff spoke on his mom. I won't speak on my mom, but I was 16 when that happened. I was nowhere near where you are after how many years has it been? 3?
Yeah.
About that?
In September, yeah.
In September. I wish we could take your strength and give it to everybody in this world. You have something in your mind,
I wish the same.
but that's why you're here. Because the hopes are a child who's gone through this, an adult who's gone through this, maybe the parent that's struggling who's contemplating suicide will see this and see the impacts, the profound effects, and think differently and reach out for help.
I know a lot of people from my professional life that have lost children or loved ones to unintentional overdose, comparable to suicide in a way, certainly sudden. And with most people that I've lost close to me, in that fashion, there was a lingering question of, was it intentional? Things just had been bad for a long time with a lot of the people close to me. Um, yeah, thinking about all this loss, and this is not a fun episode, I can say that much.
No, but look, I mean, mental health, we've said things like it's not linear, it's up and down. When it comes to mental health, it's not good nor bad, right? There's just, it's so multi-layered. Now, I don't want to shy away from your points, but I gotta know what's next for you. You have displayed this power and this resilience that, like Jeff said, we wish we could just give to everybody, right? Like, that's amazing. Facilities like Jeff owns and operates, like, they wouldn't exist if people had the mentality that you have. Um, you're obviously no longer 15. What does the rest of your life look like after that point?
So honestly, it plays into a career base. After that, I knew that I wanted to help. I wanted to help people because I know what it is to be like in a situation where you're helpless. You can't undo death. You can't do any of that. But when it spreads, you can help those people. You know what I mean? And so career base, I've uh wanted to take a career in law enforcement. That's where you really will see a lot of those cases. That's kind of how you get directly to someone.
Interesting that he brings that up because we had the judge on,
Yeah.
and he was talking about that. And most people might view a judge as he takes care of the bad guys, or oh no, I don't want to see him. I've been on both sides of that. Um, Interesting take. When you first said law enforcement, I'm like, how's that going to help? But you very quickly overturned my questions. Right, because you start to see people, you start to see the repeat offenders, and you can be a part of that. Hey, what can we do for external resources here to help this family?
And when I was listening to the last episode with the judge, he made a really good point. Not all criminals deserve jail. And for me, someone who's pursuing a career in law enforcement, I was like, yeah, I agree. Like I said, it's direct. It's a direct way to help people. You're a first responder. So I feel like if you have the mentality that, okay, well, not everyone here needs to, end up in handcuffs and at jail, there's other ways to intervene and help.
No, that's amazing. It sounds to me that you will do this, you will execute. That will be your future. And when you are in that position, you will constantly be tethered to why you started that career in the first place. That's
Uh,
rare.
and it'll never feel like work, I bet. It'll just feel like your lifestyle, what you do, what you get to do every day.
The what's the saying? If you have a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. There you go.
We're all still looking for that, yes. So you have that figured out in your late teenage years. That's amazing. Now, how are, little controversial for me to ask this, but so how are your siblings doing? And going forward in life, how do you plan on being a part of their life, supporting or whatever?
I really do want to be a part of their life. just unfortunately with living situations, it can be difficult because not all of us are pieced together. Not all of us are in the same mindset. And, I'm glad to know that I have at least one sibling in which they're in a school which can better support them. It's more of like a supportive school where there's on-site clinicians and therapists and counselors. And I'm really glad that they're there. Um, and for my other sibling, I'm glad that he's having access to those counselors, those therapists when he needs, especially in school. And I'm glad so far that the school system has played that role um, in their life. Unfortunately, I don't see them utilizing it as much as I would want them to.
Your siblings.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Just from sometimes hearing stories, I would wish, for my sibling who's in um, the supportive school, I just wish that they would access the help, that's there, but use it as intended. You know what I mean? Use it for the way that it's built and created.
Sure. But there are barriers in that way, you know. I mean, I think the students I work with on a daily basis, nobody gets out of bed and says intentionally, I'm going to ruin my day today. I'm going to cut class, get in a fight, embarrass my parents. I'm really going to screw today up. Can't wait. But do they do it? Yeah, they do it. But there are issues as to why. A lot of it is avoidance of accepting help because that's so painful to acknowledge that I need help to talk about X, Y, or Z. Right. So, yeah. So, I mean, you're in a mindset apparently of systematically looking at how do I support my family and how do I move forward. And, it's that oh crap moment that I got to do something, very type A personality, which is great to hear. Other people are made up of you know, of that texture material of like, no, I'm still dealing with the fact that I was done wrong. I'm still dealing with the fact that life screwed me over. I'm still angry at God. I'm still angry at my dad. I'm still angry at my grandmother, whatever. You know, this shouldn't have happened. My mom's supposed to be at my prom. She's supposed to be there at my wedding. She's supposed to be there when my kids are born. She's not there for those conversations. She's not there for this, that, and the other. And that's everybody's individual journey, of course. Have you seen your siblings struggle with those periods? And if you have, where have you found yourself in the role of being a supportive person and helping them deal with those moments?
Right. So just like I said, how it took a lot to accept that this had happened, I can only imagine that it's the same for them, especially for, uh, one of my youngest siblings. I can only imagine how they're processing just daily life in general. He's still growing up, um, and young, but there will come a time where, he's going to ask questions. And so, I'm as I'm also trying to prepare for that, I know that both of my siblings are most likely in a spot where they have a hard time accepting the fact that this, tragic loss had happened and kind of afraid, in which, I can also admit that I'm afraid of what the process might look like, you know?
Yeah. I mean, Jeff asked a while ago, like, did you ever turn to drugs and alcohol? Which is statistically a go to, for a lot of people, numbing the pain, escaping, you know. Um, I mean, when I was a probation officer and I worked at juveniles, that was a big go to as to how they ended up in the court system, you know, because they were so enraged about whatever was going on in their lives that they wanted to be self destructive.
Thankfully, I did not turn to drugs or alcohol to cope with any of that. Just based off of family statistics, it's just, high tolerance, things like that. Um, that always kind of put the fear into me of not becoming not becoming dependent on drugs, alcohol, things like that, and wanting to continue to pursue a future, right? when you're in a dark tunnel, all you think is the light ahead. And so when I was in that dark space of, the divorce process, the passing of my mother, I was thinking about the light ahead, which would be, what's my career after high school going to look like? What's my life after high school going to look like? Because for me, I'm thinking, well, that's going to be the end of the tunnel. That's going to be the light right there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. But it also makes sense to me. So you said you were 15, right? And your youngest sibling is how old now? 8, right? So they're approximately 5 when,
Just turned 6.
yeah.
Yeah.
So at that stage, I can't imagine any 6-year-old, 5-year-old thinking about what's going to happen after high school. I can't imagine them thinking about what's going to happen after today. You know, like my bed's not made. I don't even know how to do that.
I want to interrupt you for a second because I see where you're going with that. I want to pull that back to the question I asked because you didn't answer it. So I'm going to put you on the spot again. So you're on a great trajectory. I think you know that. I hope you know that. Okay. So your grief is not your siblings' grief. Their situations are not your situation. I'm speaking to you from experience. I have siblings. We all have grief. I happen to be the youngest of my family when I lost my mom. We're all grown up now. I hit those milestones after mom's passing. The same ones Mahesh was talking about. Getting married, having kids. Little bit of advice before I sidetrack. Everything will be amazing, even though she's not there. Never worry about that. What I want to hear you speak on, and picking up where he left off before I so rudely interrupted, was when put yourself in a position in your 30s, right? You're in a career in law enforcement, you're helping families, you're doing what you set out to do. You had the secret sauce from almost day one after you lost your mom. You had a great mindset, you had some people along the way to help you out. Now put yourself in the position where your youngest brother, you said he's 8 now, so at that point he'll be what, late teens? Now he's going to be wrestling with his own version of the grief, asking the questions. He's going to be coming to you. So this is a comment and a question for you. Be prepared to set healthy boundaries for yourself because, and this isn't a projection, but let's say one of your siblings is kind of going down a bad path and they're coming to you, you're the bailout person, right? But you have a wife, you have kids, you have this career. You can't run to their beck and call. That's my advice I'm going to offer up. Set healthy boundaries and just know they are going to offend people. That's the reality. But what are you doing now to start to position yourself? You talked about saying, yes, I know they're going to come to me. They're going to have questions. Things are going to pop up. I'm not asking if you know the answers right now, because with stuff like that, you really never will know the answer, even after you've given one. How are you setting yourself up to one day for you be ready to deal with that type of interaction?
So this definitely springs on to my youngest sibling, in which he's 8. I already know that there's going to be a time where he's going to ask some hard questions. And unfortunately, I don't have the answers right now. As much as I'm trying to process it and trying to see how I'm going to word everything and say everything, I just know that it's going to be a completely different setting come the time where he asks these questions. And, I already know I could feel it that it's not going to be questions in his late teen years. It's going to be early on.
Let me ask you a question before you finish that. Let's make a plan. So we're in the year 2026 right now. Let's you and I go get dinner in 2032. We're going to go anywhere. What are you getting? What are you going to order? Right? You don't know until you're in it. So don't get hung up on trying to figure it out right now. You're not going to know until you're there. You already said that. You can't project that. And that's why I'm asking this question. You walked right into it. So thank you. How are you moving right now where you're not getting caught up in that stuff, where it's going to impact you right now. You know, because if you're constantly thinking like, what am I going to do? How am I going to support them? You're going to potentially run into a situation where you're losing sight of what you should be doing for you.
I'm glad that there's people trained to take on the role of helping people during those times. And I feel like if he were to receive the help from those people who are, certified and licensed and knowing how to process that, that could be a huge impact. Um, like I said, I don't have all the answers. I don't know what they're going to choose to do. I don't know if they're going to choose to receive that help. I can hope. I can give them advice too.
You can model too.
Give
You
them
can
kind of a
show
little
them.
bit of, okay, well, here's kind of what I did. If you want to, do the same thing. But unfortunately, I can't drag them in to a clinic to get help unless they want to. You know what I mean?
The best thing you can do for your siblings is blaze a path, my friend. Do what you're supposed to do and show them, lead by example.
This is what it looks like. This is what we do.
And when they have questions, you'll have answers.
I've come across cases where people will be angry about the fact that being in the position that they want to help their siblings, cousins, mother, whatever, and they struggle with but if they only did this, if they only did that, if they only got out of their own way, and they have the steps as to what this other person needs to do to help themselves, right? And the frustration is that other person they're talking about, that they're worried about, that's the person that's struggling, don't see it, you know? And it's accepting the fact that there's not a goddamn thing you can do until they're ready to move forward and accept it. And it's frustrating, you know? Um, dealing with depression, being the family member that is in the home where that person's suffering, it permeates the home, right? It spreads. And it's not just painful and like, you feel for that person that's suffering, but it's a pain in the ass. It's hard to deal with. It's like, God damn, you come home from work and like had a hard day at work and you just want to have a normal dinner, throw on some Netflix, just be chill. No, that's not going to happen. You know that's not going to happen. There's going to be a screaming match about this. Are they passed that drunk on the floor? What's coming at me? And it's that pit in your stomach before you turn the doorknob, walking into that anticipated chaos that 9 out of 10 times is going to be there, and that's a horrible place to be. But knowing that you can only do what you can do in your life to lead by example and to be a support and not have to know the answers of what's going to happen 10 years from now. There is no, I'm going to do A, B, and C, because A, B, and C might not be options 10 years from now, but knowing that I love you and I care for you and I'm here for you, that's the root of it, and hopefully things will develop from there. But that other person has to receive it, right? They have to accept it. And that is their journey, and being patient enough to, and be supportive enough to allow them the space to come into it matters. But if you're breathing on somebody saying, just do this, just do this, just do this, it's not going to work. You can't stare at a plant and, say, grow, grow, grow. Expect it to, it takes time,
You can plan the scenario in your head 100 times, but it's not going to go frame by frame.
You're going to stress yourself out twice, and that doesn't need to happen. Because regardless of how much you stress and plan and think, you're gonna hit that crossroads. You're gonna have that conversation. You're gonna do that thing. You'll feel emotions in that, so you're preemptively feeling things that you might not actually have to feel. That's something that I came to the conclusion on the other day. Look, Jeff, unless you have anything to add, I know you were going to jump in a second ago. You good? Just kind of recapping. You went through something nobody should ever go through. You went through something that most of us will go through, which is the death of a parent, at a very tender age. The resilience you've displayed, the clear path ahead of you is profound. We're all double, triple your age. Seriously, what you've stumbled upon as young as you have is very impressive. You had told us initially your mission coming here was to help other people. You're going to do that. And that's going to be the theme of your life. That's what I feel from this conversation. We've been rolling for about 51 minutes right now. And I can just see the rest of your life being the pillar and the guiding light for people. People say this to me all the time, Jeff, probably you, Mahesh. I don't know where you sit with this, but your mother's beyond proud of you. And I hope you know that. You are doing her every bit of justice. Do not stop being you. Before we end this, is there anything you would like to address to somebody out there going through this? A parent, anybody. This is your episode, your space. Camera's right there. You can make your statement.
Suicide is never the answer. Will never be an answer. It doesn't end the pain. It just gives it to someone else. Really, really focus on understanding that there is a path ahead. There is light at the end of the tunnel. But suicide isn't going to jump you there. It's just going to keep you in that darkness, if not extended. So that's one thing I'd have to say. That would be it.
What should someone do instead? What kind of advice do you have to somebody struggling in that dark place?
Really push yourself to receive help. Push yourself with whatever energy you have left to receive help. If you're in therapy and it's not helping, push for more therapy, or push for something that you think will benefit you. Counseling, even just having a support system. Doesn't even have to be a therapist or a counselor, just someone that you can lean on. A support system.
Thanks for coming on, and thanks for sharing your experiences. I'm really impressed with you, and I wish you every bit of success moving forward. And I'm really happy to hear that you're there for your family. And I can't wait to see, what's gonna happen like 5-10 years from now
Thank you,
when we
Mahesh.
get together. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, man.
Thank all you guys.